Hello, everyone. Couple of announcements before we begin and a couple of reminders. As always, please put your cell phones on silent. We have a few events coming up. Tomorrow, we start our run of the Bright Lights Film Club. It runs on Tuesdays all through the summer. Tomorrow's film is Song Sung Blue, 2 o'clock tomorrow. On Wednesday, we have an SPVM presentation on safety and protecting yourself here again at 2 o'clock specifically about safety and security, important topic. On Sunday this week is the 60th anniversary of the Cote-Saint-Luc Public Library. So come at 3:30. There will be a circus show in the garden. No need to register. Bring the whole family. There will be popcorn and snacks and a whole exciting day. And then last part, we have a concert on the 16th, Bag Street Klezmer Band at 7 o'clock in Trudeau Park. If it rains, we'll be here in the auditorium. That's it. Here, without further ado, is Dr. Joe Schwartz with Science Demystified.
Thank you. You don't have to worry about the heat in here, right? But if you are worried about it outside, just think, would you rather have this or a blizzard in February? Okay, let's get going. There were a couple of guys sitting around a campfire one day shooting the breeze. And one of them asked the question, what would you guys do if you went to the doctor and you were told that you have 3 months left to live? So one of them thinks about it and says, I think I would go and take all my money out of the bank and buy a ticket for a cruise around the world. So what I always wanted to do, and I guess this is my last chance. What would you do? They asked the next one. Said, well, I don't think I could do anything like that. I think I would be so despondent that I just have to sit in a room and wait for the eventuality. And what would you do? They asked to the originator of the question. And he said, if I went to the doctor and I was told I had 3 months left to live, I would go and get a second opinion. Now, there is, of course, some truth to that, because sometimes a prophecy like that can become self-fulfilling. No doctor can know exactly how long someone will live. And no statement like that should ever be made, because it plays with the mind. And when you start playing with that, the reality can occur. So anyway, this is what we will explore here today, the connection between the body and the mind. But before we go, any further into this, let's just make sure you understand that while there is a connection between the body and the mind, it is not the prime determinant of health. There are many other things. I mean, we know that what you eat is extremely important, right? We know that genetics are very important. We know that what you breathe, what you drink, these are important. But the same way that you are what you eat, the fact is you also are what you think. And that is an important sort of parameter to examine. I mean, you know that if you eat the wrong food, you can get sick, right? I mean, we all know this. But the fact is that if you think the wrong thought, that can also make you sick because of this connection between the body and the mind. Well, let's start out with an interesting story, one that I think you all know, and that is the story of the Wizard of Oz. Let me just recap it quickly for you. There was the Cowardly Lion, who of course wanted courage. There was a Scarecrow who wanted a brain. There was the Tin Man who wanted a heart. And there was Dorothy, who for some bizarre reason wanted to go back to Kansas. But anyway, as you know, they ended up traveling towards the city of Oz, where the wizard was said to be able to grant all wishes. And indeed, they got there. and they knock on the door and they go in and they have an audience with the wizard. And there's a lot of smoke and lights and fire, and it all looks very, very impressive, scary. But what we know is that there was no real wizard. It was a man behind the curtain, right, playing the role of wizard. And yet, he was able to grant their wishes, right? The Cowardly Lion got his courage, Scarecrow got a brain, Tin Man got a heart, and eventually Dorothy got to go back to Kansas. Why? Because of the power of the belief, right? I mean, the wizard wasn't able to physically put a heart into the Tin Man. Incidentally, who played the role of the Tin Man? There's a very interesting story behind that. No, it wasn't Ray Bolger. Ray Bolger was a Scarecrow. Jack Haley, very good. Jack Haley. But here's the interesting part of the story. Jack Haley was not the original actor hired for that role. Anyone know who was? Buddy Ebsen. Buddy Ebsen. And what happened was that when they put on the aluminum paint to make him look like the Tin Man, he had a reaction to it. And he ended up in hospital. And they waited for 2 weeks to start filming. And then they decided they couldn't wait anymore. And they hired Jack Haley to play that role, which obviously turned out to be a pretty big role. Although Buddy Ebsen didn't do so badly after. Of course, he played in the Beverly Hillbillies for many, many years, which was a very, very clever TV show. But anyway, that's how Jack Haley got that role. So anyway, it was really a demonstration of the power of the imagination and a demonstration of the connection between the power and mind and the body. But to give you maybe a more concrete example, you ever wondered how it was that since time immemorial, when physicians really knew nothing in antiquity, and yet when the doctor would put a soothing hand on a patient and said, I think everything is going to be okay, right away the patient relaxed, and very often the pain went away. Or why was it that for over 2,000 years, bloodletting went on? A totally useless thing. How could it go on for 2,000 years? Because so many people were satisfied that their pain resolved, that their ailment got better. It didn't have anything to do with taking the blood out of the body. I mean, that was one of the biggest misconceptions about how the body works, that, you know, all illness comes from the blood. Bloodletting doesn't solve anything, except in the rare case if someone suffers from, anyone know? What is the condition for which bloodletting would actually be indicated? It's hemochromatosis, when you have excessive buildup of iron in the blood. And that is a legitimate treatment. But in the case of bloodletting, why is it that people were satisfied with what was happening? Because it was all coming from the mind. They believed in the treatment. And when you believe in the treatment, the mind can be very, very powerful because of this connection between the body and the mind. Well, let me take you back for a moment to Vienna. And we're going to look at the 18th century. And the Viennese public was taken with the exploits of a young boy who at the age of 5 was composing concertos. That, of course, was Mozart. But there was someone else at that time in Vienna who was capturing the public's attention, and that was Anton Mesmer. Anton Mesmer was a trained physician, as trained as anyone was in those days. And what did you learn in medical school then? You learned how to bleed people, how to purge people, how to torture them until they said enough and I feel better, right? And Mesmer was disenchanted with what he was doing, because he realized his patients really weren't getting better. So he wondered if there was kinder, gentler way to combat illness. And he had become interested in magnets. Now, magnets were quite a novel phenomenon in those days. Today, of course, we understand magnet, well, understand more or less. I mean, at least we're familiar with magnets. Exactly how they work is still somewhat of a mystery. But anyway, Mesmer was very interested in magnets. He realized, of course, that they exuded some sort of power. Because let's face it, if you take a strong magnet and you put it on one side of your hand and put a metal object on the other side of your hand, it will be attracted. Well, what does that mean? That something from the magnet is going through your body, right? I mean, how else could you explain that you hold a magnet in your hand and you put a piece of metal on the other side and it's attracted? So he was really intrigued by that. And he thought that maybe the magnet also could have some benefit in attracting disease out of the body. Today, of course, we look at that as you know, a ridiculous kind of claim. But back then, you know, it wasn't. Magnets seemed to have some sort of magical property. Maybe they could even have a therapeutic effect. So what did he do? He opened up a healing salon where patients came and held on to what Mesmer said were magnetized rods that would draw the disease out of their body. And there was no trouble at all attracting patients, because certainly this was a much more attractive treatment than bloodletting or purging. So they came to be healed of diseases they never had, right? And the mind played a role in this. Of course, they didn't know that. They thought that there was actually something happening here. But the medical establishment in Vienna did not like what was going on, because Mesmer was basically taking money out of their pockets, right? Because the treatments that he offered were a lot more sedate and more attractive than what they were able to offer. So they kind of circled the wagons and essentially drove Mesmer out of Vienna. He ended up in Paris, where he set up another healing establishment. And by this time, he came to another conclusion. He thought that people who were healthy actually exuded a magnetism that could help others. So he started to stray away from the metal rods, and he hired good-looking young men to cater to the supposed diseases of the young women who came to him. And they would sit knee to knee next to these young men and kind of have the disease be massaged out of their body. And Mesmer was, of course, telling them that the health of the young men was being exuded, and this is what was causing the healing. As he recorded in his diary, some of these young ladies needed further backroom therapy, but never quite explained what that meant. Well, you know, today we laugh at this idea of magnetized rods sucking disease out of people. And yet, believe it or not, it is still happening today in a different form. Here's a 0-point energy wand, which I encountered on the internet for $300, which actually seems to be a bargain if it can do all of the things that it claims to do. The balances the body's imbalance. There's an interesting grammatical statement. Food solutions, impregnate them onto sugar pills as a treatment for the various diseases. So he would have his family, friends try different substances, for example, arsenic, in increasing doses to see what it would do. Well, if you take arsenic in a single dose, it gives you a stomach ache. And therefore, for him, dilute arsenic solution was a cure for stomach ache. Okay? Well, of course, it wasn't. But it wasn't harmful either because the dilutions were so extreme that nothing was contained there. And the solutions were dripped onto little pieces of sugar, and that became the homeopathic remedy. And as you can see, the numbers on there, that indicates the extent of dilution. So, for example, a 12C dilution would be achieved by taking your original solution, taking 1 drop, adding 99 drops of water, taking 1 drop of that, adding 99 drops of water, doing this 12 times. Well, we can make the calculation that after you've done this 12 times, there's absolutely nothing there. All you are getting is just water. That's what a homeopathic remedy is. Contains absolutely nothing, except for one thing. It does contain a placebo effect. If you believe that it is going to do some good for you, it very often does. Now, that can be very beneficial. If you're suffering from things like arthritis, which don't have a specific cure, if it makes you feel better, great, as long as it's not doing any harm. And it's not going to do any harm because it contains nothing, right? The danger of a homeopathic remedy is when the so-called therapist makes claim about curing diseases such as cancer, which some homeopaths do. And that, of course, can distract people from having legitimate therapies. That's a completely different story. When COVID arose, the homeopaths loved that because, when there's some condition for which science can't offer an immediate treatment, that leaves the door open for quackery because the quack will never say, I don't know. They always have some sort of solution. So what did they have? For COVID, they had homeopathic arsenic solution. Total nonsense, obviously. I mean, COVID was due to a virus, and placebos do not cure viral infections. I mean, there are certain things that placebos can do. If you have the occasional headache, yeah, placebos can work for that, as long as it's not due to a tumor, but placebos will not cure any disease. All they can do is change your perception of the disease, which sometimes can be okay when there is no real treatment for the disease. Well, if the mind can have this kind of a positive connection, right? If it can make you think that you're feeling better, what about the other extreme? What about a negative mind connection? Is that possible? Well, imagine that you're lying in bed at night, middle of the night, and the phone rings. Now, I know you no longer have phones like that, but phone can still ring, right? All of a sudden, you become anxious. You start to sweat as you run for that phone. Why? Because you know that in the middle of the night, chances are you're not being informed that you won the lottery, right? It's probably news that's not so good. Your blood pressure goes up. You start to sweat. Has anything touched you? Has there been any physical intervention? No. So where does this rapid heartbeat come from? It's coming from stimulation by the brain, right? Or your perception that bad news may be in the offing. So just that kind of fear can certainly have a physical effect. For example, in this case, if you have a impending visit from this creature, it can cause physical harm. Some of you can probably remember, relating to such things. But there are even better examples. I'll give you a real concrete example of a group of ladies who were playing golf, of course, just outside of Montreal. And it's early in the morning, and a truck comes by with a spray, spraying the course. And they get all concerned, of course. They think, some of the spray gets on them, it must be a pesticide, it's a problem. They rush back into the clubhouse and they accost the greenskeeper. And one of them complains, I got a headache. The other one says, I got a rash. And the third one had the most serious complaint of all. But I'm sure you already guessed the bottom line to the story. There was a truck out there early in the morning, and it was spraying. Well, it was spraying water. But these ladies had been reading stories about pesticides being used on golf courses, which they are, and about how pesticides can be harmful, which can be under some conditions. And they just assumed that they had been contaminated. And they had these symptoms. Now, there's no doubt that they had the symptoms. But where was it coming from? Their mind. So this is the opposite of the placebo effect. This is what we call the nocebo effect. And the nocebo is the idea that a negative thought can have a negative effect on the body. So, is it possible, though, that positive thoughts, as we have already discussed, can be used therapeutically? Well, one of the most interesting examples is that of Norman Cousins, who was the editor of Saturday Night Magazine, which was a very popular magazine. Cousins was struck by ankylosing spondylitis, which is a type of arthritis that affects the spine. It has a spontaneous cure rate of about 1 to 2%, which is, of course, very low. So it's very often, it's a lifetime of suffering. He was in the hospital, but there was nothing there that the doctors couldn't do for him. So he decided that he would rent a nearby hotel room nearby in case he had to go to the hospital. And he was going to treat himself with laughter, because there already were stories around that you can kind of laugh your way to health, and that laughter is the best medicine. So he rented a movie projector. This was, of course, before digital equipment, and so he rented a movie projector and he rented movies. And in that hotel room, he watched funny movies. He watched The Three Stooges, which at that time were still funny. Today, you show to kids and it just doesn't go over. It's a different kind of humor that they want these days. But he laughed and laughed and laughed. And within 6 months, he started to feel better and actually went back to work and no longer complained about any problems. And he recorded his adventure in a book that obviously became a bestseller called Anatomy of an Illness. Why a bestseller? Because, who wouldn't want to read a story like that of someone suffering from a terrible condition and laughing himself back to health? It's a great story. What actually happened there is impossible to say. As I told you, almost all diseases do have a spontaneous remission rate. Generally very low. But even terrible conditions like liver cancer, in very rare cases, can, without any explanation, just reverse, and the tumors disappear. No one knows how. Happens. So I suspect that it was a spontaneous remission, and he was a lucky fellow. But of course, you can't prove that. But the story of having positive thoughts, having a positive effect on your health, started to roll along thanks to that book. And researchers became seriously interested in this and organized some studies. For example, at University College London, one of the most interesting ones, where a group of office workers was asked to give saliva samples periodically during a day. And they also filled out forms rating how they feel on a scale of 1 to 10 at any given moment. Do they feel sad? Do they feel happy? Whatever. And they did this for several days. And their saliva samples were analyzed for chemicals like cortisol and fibrinogen, the relatively simple chemical analysis. And it turned out that their mood, their happiness, was associated with the levels of these chemicals. So when they were feeling happy, there was actually less cortisol in their saliva, which is a stress hormone, etc. So it seemed that thoughts really were, influencing their health. Now, there were scientific publications that approached this whole idea of the body or mind having an effect over the body. One of the interesting such articles was this one that was published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal about Winnie the Pooh. Now, this is interesting for a different reason. Well, I tell you the mind connection here. It was a very interesting scientific paper where they investigated the antics of Winnie the Pooh and why he was so compelled to search for honey. And they diagnosed him as obsessive compulsive disease. Then they investigated Tigger, who was found to be hyperactive. Now, what is interesting reason why I'm telling you this story? Because letters flowed in to the editor after this paper was published, complaining that the journal was using humor in a medical magazine. Well, the paper was a very serious paper. They discussed OCD. They discussed hyperactivity in a very serious way. They just used the story of character that everyone knows, Winnie the Pooh, to get the ball rolling, to generate some interest. But instead of commenting on the important scientific features of that story, which are very good, the letters were about the dishonorable use of humor in a scientific publication. Well, that was nonsense. And today, I think it is being recognized as nonsense because you go into hospitals, pediatric hospitals, and they will have what they call clown care units. Clowns go into the kids' rooms, especially before surgery, to amuse them. And it turns out that they do better after surgery. They often require less anesthetics because of the clowns. In India, they have laughing clubs. They meet in the morning before work, usually in a park, and they tell each other jokes. And they laugh and laugh and say that they have better days and they have more functionality during those days when they have laughed in the morning. The only problem was that pretty soon they run out of jokes to tell. And now they just gather in the park and just laugh at nothing. And it still seems to work. It hasn't taken off yet in North America, but it may when you hear what one of the side effects of this morning laughter is, and that is weight loss. This is something that would sell in North America. Anything that causes weight loss, whether it's green coffee bean extract or laughter, that would sell. Anyway, this idea that laughter is the best medicine, as you can see, has some substance. But then you have to ask the question, if you're going to actually use laughter as therapy, what is it that we laugh at? Because we don't all laugh at the same things, right? Visual humor is very subjective. Some people would laugh at that, right? Others think it's ridiculous. Some would laugh at the pie in the face story, right? Well, you only laugh at that if you're not the one getting the pie in the face. Because very often we laugh at things when we're happy that it's not happening to us, right? But when it comes to laughing at cartoons, for example, it all depends on your background, on your sociological and educational background. For example, when we look at this, looking at the tie, it's too tight, we see the humor in this. But if you would show this to someone in Africa who has never heard of a necktie, it would be absolutely meaningless, right? If you don't know the story of William Tell, this is just a random drawing, doesn't mean anything. If you're not familiar with the story of Dracula and how you can kill the vampire by driving the wooden stake through his heart, if you don't know that story, you don't know what to make of this. It's meaningless, right? So humor can be very cultural. If you're not familiar with the whole animal rights controversy, then you don't really appreciate the humor here, right? And sometimes this animal rights controversy can be really extreme, right? And that is what is portrayed here. And unless you've heard of the controversy these days about ultra-processed foods, then you don't see the humor of this. So, you know, there's a lot of background that is needed if you want to entertain an audience with humor. You have to know what to use. For example, this one, I need a bottle of vitamin B12. Out of B12, 2 bottles of B6. Now, you see, you laugh at that because you know something about vitamins, and you know that the 12 does not mean double dose of 6, that is a completely different story. But if you know nothing about vitamins, as many people fall into that category, then this goes totally over your head. And if you've not heard, you know, about doctors constantly being sued, then that isn't very funny. And if you've never been in a hospital and been told to wear a hospital gown, then you don't know what to make of that. But you know, if you've ever worn a hospital gown and felt the breeze in your back, then you know what that's all about. And then, of course, these days there's a lot of controversy about people using cell phones all the time and reaching for it, you know, every second of the day. And if you're familiar with that, then of course you see the humor in this. The guy trying to, you know, stop himself from using the cell phone. But for each of these, there is some background story. So if we're going to even contemplate using, you know, humor as some sort of therapy, you have to know how to use it. And that is especially the case when it comes to jokes, because not everyone appreciates the same jokes, right? This also is very, you know, cultural background. Like there's the priest and the rabbi, and they get on a train, and the only 2 seats are next to each other, and they're forced to sit next to each other. They don't very much to talk about, but it's going to be a long train ride, so they decide, well, you know, they better strike up a conversation, you know, of some kind. And the priest pipes up first and says, "Rabbi, understand you have certain restrictions in your religion." And he says, yes. And he says, well, you know, we have some dietary laws, and we don't eat pork products. We don't have sandwiches made of ham and cheese and bacon, etc. And the priest says, but Rabbi, you've heard that, you know, people around the world enjoy a ham and cheese sandwich. Weren't you ever tempted? And the rabbi kind of sheepishly says, yes, back when I was a young man before my calling, yes, I did have a ham and cheese sandwich. And the priest is kind of happy he's won this little battle. And the train rolls along. And then the rabbi starts up and he says, but you have restrictions in your religion too, right? And the priest admits, yes, we're not allowed to get married because we're married to God. And the rabbi says, well, you hear stories of people having romantic relationships and the pleasure that it gives them. Didn't you ever wonder about that? Weren't you ever tempted? And he says, yes, I must be honest. When I was a young man, before I found my calling, I did have a relationship with a woman. And the rabbi looks at him and says, hell of a lot better than ham and cheese, isn't it? Then there was the professor who has large class in front of him, and it's a biology class. And says, can anyone tell me what part of the body expands to 10 times its size when it's stimulated? Young lady starts waving her arm in the back, says, sir, these days, comments like that, off-color comments like that are not appreciated. He says, young lady, please sit down. I have a couple of things to say to you. What I was talking about was the pupil of the eye, because you know that when there's a lot of light, it shuts down, and then you stimulate it, and it increases in size. The second thing I have to say to you is that sometime in your life you're going to be very disappointed. Some people understand that, some do not. And then there are, battles between certain professions, like the two physicians and a chiropractor find themselves sitting on an airplane next to each other, and they don't get along. I mean, chiros and physicians don't get along for all the right reasons. Physicians look down on chiros, as they should. So anyway, they're complaining to each other and all of that. And finally, the chiro says, I've had enough of this for now. I'm going to go get some Cokes from the flight attendant. You guys want? I said, yes, bring us back also. When he gets up, they see that he left his shoes under the seat. And they've been so annoyed by this guy, they decide to fix them, and they spit into the shoe. He comes back with the Cokes and gives the Cokes to two docs, and puts his feet into his shoes, and immediately realizes what happened here. Right? Then he looks at them and says, listen, you guys, they're sitting there sipping away their drink. And he says, listen, we got to stop this battling between our professions. We got to stop this spitting into shoes, peeing into Cokes. All right. Well, some of you will appreciate that. So anyway, as you see, you got to know what an audience will like. But there was a contest about the world's funniest joke. This was run by a magazine in England, and they had numerous entries. And this was the winner. It was about Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, and they're out camping. And Holmes looks up, sees the stars, and pokes Watson and says, Watson, look up, what do you say? And Watson says, gee, I see these millions, probably trillions of stars, and it just makes me feel so insignificant. Our universe is so huge. I just can't conceive, that here we are on this insignificant little planet in this gigantic universe. I mean, it's just awe-inspiring. And then Watson says to Holmes, what do you think when you look up? And Holmes says, Watson, you fool, someone stole our tent. that that was judged to be the best joke. And then there are the political jokes, of impossible situations where Trump, for some reason, invites Obama to try out his new jumbo jet that was given to him by Qatar. And he also invites the Pope because he feels that he has a special relation with the Pope. And the Pope comes. And there's also a little girl who has gotten some sort of a prize to be with these famous people for having written some clever essay, and so she gets to go along on the ride. Well, they're flying along, and the plane starts to vibrate like crazy, and it looks like it's going to crash. But of course, this being Air Force One, they've thought of safety features and that there are parachutes. But since the plane is new, they look around. It looks like there weren't enough parachutes. There's 4 of them, and there's only 3 parachutes. So Obama says first, he says to the Pope, "You are the leader of millions of people around the world. Take the parachute and jump." He does, and jumps. And then Obama says to Trump, "You're the president of the free world. Take the parachute and jump." Trump does and dives out. Now there's the 2 of them left and only 1 parachute. And Obama says to the little girl, "Listen, I'm old. I've had my run. You're young. You still have a future to look to. You take the last parachute." Oh. The little girl says, "Oh, don't worry. Don't worry, Mr. Obama. We both have a parachute." And Obama says, "How is that?" Well, I said, "Well, Trump just jumped out with my backsack." All right. Anyway, the thing is that well, humor is interesting. I mean, it's not enough. You have to know when to use humor and when to consult a physician. And these days, people, of course, are concerned about consulting physicians because they think that they are overwhelmed by the equipment that they use, that they rely on CAT scans all the time, that they don't really know enough about the medications that they prescribe. They don't know of the side effects that that they can cause. So the fact is that there's more than one way to do anything, and you have to know what is appropriate when. Sometimes it is medications that are important. Sometimes humor can play an important role. But there's one other interesting aspect of healing that I'll mention, which, believe it or not, is magic. Now, what we're talking about are tricks, illusions, pulling rabbits out of hats. Not magic in the sense of witches riding brooms. That, of course, is a lot of hogwash. What we're talking about is the age-old practice of magic, of sleight of hand, the cups and balls, the splitting of women into 2, such as Doug Henning, perhaps the most famous ever Canadian magician, did. But of course, you know that everything a magician does on the stage is an actor playing the role of a magician, because everything has a scientific explanation. I mean, if you see a woman cut in half and you see the head moving and the legs moving, you come to the conclusion that somehow there are two women involved and that it is the equipment that is actually doing the magic. But there's something else to magic. It will tantalize the mind. When you see a magic trick, what you're really thinking without realizing is, how was that done? Right? That's really what you think. So it forces you to think, but it has another value. We used to give a course or demonstration at the Montreal Children's Hospital to kids, teach them some magic. Now, these are kids, of course, who generally are not in their best mood. And I chose this picture because you see the little Inuit girl there. She was flown to Montreal from some Inuit community up north, not speaking a word of English or French. She was flown down without her parents, never having been out of that community. Imagine that, ending up in a big city in a hospital, which she had never seen, surrounded by people she couldn't talk to, doing things to her that she didn't understand. She didn't have to understand magic. We did a few simple tricks for her, and not only that, taught her how to do some simple things so that she could then show the other kids. And believe it or not, her mood improved unbelievably. Obviously, she still couldn't speak the language, but no longer was she sitting there crying. She understood the magic. But one final point that I want to make when it comes to magic and the connection of the body and the mind, sometimes connections are made by charlatans, which are not true. The classic example is walking on a bed of hot coals, which some of the charlatans claim is a paranormal event. That is, there's some kind of supernatural process involved that you can learn so that you can walk across a bed of coals. And they charge for weekend seminars thousands of dollars to reveal to people how they can do this. How can they walk on a bed of hot coals, which means that they will also be able to do other supernatural things in their life. Well, there's nothing paranormal about this. Anyone can do this. It is very impressive. You do have a hot bed of coals, and it really is hot. You can take a piece of Kleenex and hold it above it and it will catch fire. And then the demonstrator will show how he can kind of put himself into a meditative state and then walk across, and others follow. There's nothing supernatural about this. It may seem like that, but it has a perfectly normal physical explanation. The coals really are hot, but in order to feel heat, the heat has to be transferred. I'll give you the analogy. If you're baking a cake and you crank up your oven 450 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever it is, and the cake has been sitting in there for an hour or whatever it takes, you can reach in there with your finger and touch the cake to see if it's soft or hard. No problem. But you can't touch the metal pan. Are they not at the same temperature? They've been sitting for an hour in that oven. They are at the same temperature. What's the difference? The metal transfers the heat. It conducts the heat very well, transfers it to your finger. The cake does not. The cake is actually an insulator. Well, that bed of coals is covered by a thin layer of soot. Soot is an insulator. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that you can walk and dally and stop in the middle and have a conversation. You have to walk across at a steady state. And, it takes a little bit of bravado to do that. But it doesn't take any kind of supernatural intervention. Also, when you're going to do that, you're probably going to be sweating a little bit, and there's some moisture on the bottom of your foot, and that also helps insulate. And there's a very easy way to demonstrate that there's no paranormal event taking place here. All you have to do is take one of these people who claims that, you know, they have some special power that they can walk across poles. I say, all right, here's our bed of hot coals. Let me put some aluminum foil on top of it. Now you walk across. Well, you'll see them hot-footed out of there very quickly, because of course that aluminum foil will transmit the heat very, very effectively. Anyway, so that kind of brings us to the end, and you know, I mean, the body-mind connection, of course, is not the solution to all of our problems, because you know there are some people who are only happy when they're miserable, but it is an important concept. But of course, other things like what we eat are also very important. And so I leave you with one last line from John Milton, a celebrated English poet. The mind itself can make a heaven of hell and a hell of heaven. And when you think about that, you know that that is